Hi, my name's Seth, and together we're going to talk about English literature. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we should talk about is the plot. That's the most important part of the story. So the plot is basically a sequence of events. That is the core of what a plot means. So you remember that graph in your book? It kind of looks like this. It starts out flat and it goes up, and then it has a peak, and then it goes like this. So this is a really good graph to kind of show you how a plot works in a story, kind of the mechanics of the plot. So this would be time. As time goes on, things happen. That's not really clear in the book when we read it. But the x-axis would be time. So as time goes on, events happen, and there is the peak or the conflict, the main conflict, the climax, and then obviously the resolution. So the first part of the plot is kind of, we call it setting the stage. So it's kind of a term from a play or a movie, set the stage, like it's the stage where people act. So this is talking about the setting and the characters and things like this, the basic part of the story, what we call the premise. What is the situation they are in? When is it? Where is it? Who is in the story? It basically tries to ask and answer the question words, who, what, why, when, where, and how. And so this really not a lot is happening in this time. We just kind of learn, the basic beginning parts of the story. So this would be this part of the graph, kind of this part. There's not a whole lot happening here. We just basically start to learn a little bit about the characters, and we learn the setting basically of the story. So, what is happening here as it starts to escalate towards the climaxes, these are a series of events. So something happens in the story, and it just kind of escalates. So things keep getting either more exciting or more intense as it reaches towards a climax. So the climax is where something gets very, very intense, the most intense part of the story. And then the climax or the conflict is resolved, and we can move into the conclusion. So these are the basic parts of a story, and of course we'll talk about each of them more in detail. So when we talk about the plot, and we talk about this part, this very kind of beginning part, we're going to want to learn about the characters, and the setting, so just answering those question words, who are people, where is it, when is it, and something else that's really important that a lot of people don't think about is the goal. So every character has a goal. Even in real life, think about this. Everyone has a goal. Some people want to be a doctor. Some people want to be rich. Some people want to travel all over the world. People have a goal, what they want to do with their lives. And in a story, it's really important to think about each character's goal. You have to think about, what do they want? What does this character want? What is he trying to do? What is his motivation? So this is a really important part. And the goal is usually given in the early part of the story, because it kind of helps explain what the character is thinking and why the character does something. So we can ask, when we ask ourselves, why does he do this? Why did he do this? Think back to the goal. What is his goal? Usually characters stick to their goal. They want something, and their actions will help them get to their goal. So this is why the goal is really important. So the next part that we should really talk about would be the conflict. So this is also something that's given fairly early in the story. So it's kind of related to the goal. Another reason why the goal is important. So the conflict is, what is stopping the character from reaching his goal? Why can't the character get to his goal? So the conflict is really the basis of the story. What is the conflict? Why can't the character reach his goal? That is, and this basically the story is how the character overcomes the conflict, or how he can beat the conflict to reach his goal, or possibly he can't. So as we talk about these events basically are talking about the conflict. How does this conflict arise, and what is the conflict exactly? Conflict is like a battle. So the character really wants to get this goal. He really wants this goal here, and he has to fight to get the goal. So this is him fighting against the conflict to get to his goal. And the climax is basically as he's about to reach his goal, or if he's about to fail. So he doesn't always reach his goal. A lot of great stories are very sad. The character doesn't reach his goal, and then the conclusion tries to kind of wrap things up. And there are a lot of different ways to conclude a story, but it's not. The conclusion is not as intense as the climax. The climax is the part of a movie where we're sitting on the edge of our seats, really excited. Or in a horror story when we're reading very quickly because it's really exciting and scary. It's the most action-packed and suspenseful part of the story. So the climax really, it is an event just like the others. It's an event of the conflict, but it is the main one. Sometimes we call it the point of no return. The point of no return, it's basically saying you can't go back. Once you get here, this is the highest point, right? In the graph, it's the highest point, and it's the point of no return. You can't go back. You can't go back to a easier time. This is the most stressful part for the character, because he can see the goal. He is almost there, but he might not get it. So this is really good to think about a movie. A movie fits really well with this format. Most stories do, but a movie really, really fits well. So let's think of a popular movie as an example, like The Lord of the Rings. So in The Lord of the Rings, this part would be like when the hobbits are in the Shire and we meet the characters, Frodo and Gandalf, and it's pretty low-key and happy and a little bit funny. And nothing too intense or exciting happens. We just learn the characters, and we learn that they're in Middle-earth and the Shire. And we learn about the goal. Think about this. What is the goal in The Lord of the Rings? Right? Frodo wants to destroy the ring. And then what is the conflict? Well, the conflict is very intense in The Lord of the Rings. They have to go through the orcs and fight the evil wizards and the evil people. So there's a lot of things conflicting with the goal, with Frodo's goal to destroy the ring. So we're given all of this information in the beginning of the story. And then the events are kind of the things that happen to Frodo and his group as he travels and tries to destroy the ring. So when they go to Rivendell and they meet different people and they form the Fellowship of the Ring, all of these are events that happen leading up to the climax. So this graph is actually very funny for The Lord of the Rings because the climax is on a mountain. The climax is as Frodo is climbing up the mountain to go up to the volcano to destroy the ring. The climax is right before he destroys the ring, right before he reaches the goal. Immediately before the character reaches the goal or does not reach the goal is the climax. So it is when the conflict is the worst. When the conflict and the goal are coming together, that is when we get to the climax. And then the conclusion in The Lord of the Rings is they can go back to the Shire, and a group goes into another land on the boat. So this is there are lots of different ways to conclude a story, but in The Lord of the Rings, it's much less intense, much less exciting than the conclusion when Frodo is actually trying to destroy the ring. So a lot of movies really follow this format. Everyone can really kind of understand this way to tell a story because it kind of slowly builds, and then there's the really big intense moment and then a conclusion. Most movies are a happy ending. We call it a happy ending, where everyone is, oh, it's very nice. It's a love story, or something very nice happens in the conclusion. And movies really follow this format quite closely. So let's talk a little bit more about the resolution. So the conclusion we also call the resolution. So, a resolution is like to solve a problem. So in The Lord of the Rings, the problem was trying to destroy the ring. So was Frodo able to destroy the ring? Yes, he was. So the problem was resolved. In another story, you have to think of the goal and the conflict. How did the character overcome the conflict to reach his goal? That is the resolution. Was the problem resolved? Yes or no? We have to ask ourselves that question when we're thinking about a story. So let's talk about something else. Let's talk about timing. Timing is something really important in a story. We have to think about the sequence of events. Does it follow this kind of beginning to end format? That is what we would call chronological. So chronological timing follows the story from the beginning till the end. And this is how most stories are told. It's easy for the viewer or the reader to understand, and it makes the most sense. But there are some kind of artistic, different ways that we can use timing also. We can also use flashbacks. And flashbacks are when we're somewhere here in the story and the character remembers something from the beginning. The character has a dream, or he is daydreaming about something that happened in the past. And this kind of gives us some background information about something that happened earlier in the story that we didn't hear or read about at the time. So flashbacks are something that we can use a different way to tell a story. So a flashback, maybe, for instance, the story could start here and go like this, and then the character has a flashback, and we go to the beginning. So for a flashback, an example would be a movie or story that starts with a lot of action, and then the movie or the story goes back in time to actually the beginning of the story and tells us about the character and the setting and the goal and the conflict. So it's just a kind of a different way. Instead of going from beginning to end, it starts in the middle, talks about the beginning, and then finishes the story. So it's just a different sequence of events. Another one that writers and in movies they like to use is called foreshadowing. So foreshadowing is something, they give the reader or the viewer a hint of what will happen in the future. So it will be somewhere in the middle of the story, and they will give you a hint about what's going to happen in the climax or later in the story. So it kind of lets the reader or the viewer try to guess what's happening. They don't tell you exactly what will happen. It's just a hint. So it allows the reader to try to guess what's going to happen. Another thing that authors and people who write movies like to try to do is use foreshadowing and flashbacks to try to create suspense. So if we're in the middle of the story and something bad is happening to the character, then they'll go back in time to a less intense time. So it kind of builds the suspense. Oh, what's going to happen to this character? Something bad is happening. But then it will go back and talk about the characters and the setting, and then you kind of relax. And then it goes back to the action. You're, what's going to happen? So it's a really great way to build suspense into a story. So in your book, it asks you to write about a hair-raising situation. So hair-raising, there's like hair on our body. So hair-raising is when the hair comes up. So we say something is hair-raising when it's really scary or very, very intense. You're very scared or very worried. So, the example given is contents of a dead man's pocket. So, he's sitting outside on the building hanging on, and he thinks he's going to fall off the building and die. So we say that's a hair-raising event. The hair on your arm just stands up and you're, really scared. So they want you to write about something in your life that was hair-raising, something scary that happened in your life. So I just wanted to explain what hair-raising is. It's something really scary or really intense. So please write something about that happened in your life that's really scary or really intense. Another thing that authors like to do, kind of playing with timing. Timing is basically just time, how the story uses time, is they like to slow things down. They can kind of change the way things happen. So let's think of contents of a dead man's pocket. So in the beginning, when he's kind of sitting at his desk and his wife is putting on her makeup and getting ready to go to the movie, the main character and doesn't really experience time as intensely as he does later in the story. Time is kind of going quickly. But later, when the main character is out on the ledge on the building, the time goes by excruciatingly slow. It goes by so slowly. So remember, he is out on the ledge and he sees that his cigarette is still burning. So, in the beginning of the story, a lot of things happen in just 1 or 2 pages. But, when the character is on the ledge outside the building, the time goes by really, really slow, and he just cannot believe that cigarette is still burning. It's only been a few minutes since he's been outside. And to us, the readers, and to the character, it felt like he was out there for a really long time because the author described in more detail what was happening. He used longer sentences, and he kind of spread time out by making the pages longer. He didn't make the pages longer, but he talked about things more in this part when he's outside than he did when the character was inside. So let's talk a little bit about cause and effect. So this is something that's also really important to think about, is, why do things happen in the story? And then, the effect is what happened because of that cause. So let's use contents of a dead man's pocket as an example. What happened in the story? Well, the main character was caught outside. He got caught outside of his building trying to pick up that paper. So why was he caught? Why couldn't someone help him? That's the cause. What is the cause? Well, there are a few things. Remember, the window closed, so he couldn't go back inside. And remember, his wife went out to watch a movie. And his wife was going to be gone at least 3 hours. So those are the causes. And the effects would be that he couldn't go back inside, and that he couldn't just wait for his wife to come home. He had to get inside in some way. So let's try to use this graph to talk about a dead man's pockets. So this is kind of when we meet the characters and when it's talking about his job and how hard he works, and we meet his wife and we learn that she is going to the movie by herself. And then it starts to kind of go into these events. The door opens and the paper flies out the window, and he decides to go out the window to get the paper, and he picks up the paper and he almost falls off the building. So try to think, what would be the climax of this story? Remember, the climax is right before the character reaches his goal. So what is his goal? His goal is to get inside the house. So the climax is as he reaches back here to punch the window, right? Is right before he reaches his goal, which is to go inside. So right here, this is the conflict. And he punches, and the window breaks, and then he goes into his house, and so he reaches his goal. So in the Dead Man's Pocket, there are basically two settings, right? Inside the apartment and then outside on the ledge. And the writer does a really great job of contrasting these two settings. In his apartment looks so nice and clean and comfortable, and outside on the ledge, it is, he's just scared for his life. So he really uses the two settings to tell the story very well. So let's talk a little bit about the poem, kind of at the end of the part you were supposed to read for today's lesson. You want a social life with friends. And how does that relate to Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket? So in Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket, he's thinking about the choice he's had to make between working and spending time with his wife. So that's one of the conflicts in this story is the choice between work and his wife. And in the poem, they're saying that you have this choice between three things. You can either have family, work, or friends. You can have two, but you can't have three. So they kind of are related in the way that you have to choose. You can't have everything. The poem particularly says this. You cannot have everything. You have to choose. You can have two, but you can't have three. In Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket, he realizes this. He's thinking about this when he's outside the building, fearing for his life. He's thinking, I'm working too hard. I need to spend more time with my wife. He realizes that he cannot have both. And in the poem, basically the poem's moral, its message is saying, you can't have both. You have to choose between one or the other. So one way that we can some words that we can watch out for cause are as a result, because of, then, thus, therefore. If you see those kind of words, you'll know that this is a cause. It's a kind of a cause-effect relationship. So another thing that your book asks you to do is to rewrite your story about the hair-raising event in the third person. So we say first person is you say I. I did this, I woke up, I ate breakfast, the subject is I. Third person is when we tell the story and we say he. He did this, he did that. So the first time you write the story about the hair-raising event, write it in the first person, I, and then write it again in the third person, he. Third person, so it's like you're telling the story looking at yourself. You aren't the subject. Another person is the subject. So it's kind of a good way to think about how we can write a story. And I'll end on this. Your text really wants you to study prefixes at the end. And prefixes are really important because even if we don't know the meaning of a word, if we know the prefix, we can kind of guess the meaning of the word. English has so many words, about 1 million words, and no one knows them all. But one way we can guess the meaning of words without using the dictionary, just when we're reading, we can guess if we know the prefixes or if we know the endings. So it may seem a little boring to study these prefixes, but it really is important. It is something that will help you. All right, I think we'll wrap up there, and I'll see you next time.